In 1995, the Queen of England's personal bank was sold. The legendary institution that financed the Louisiana Purchase and defeated Napoleon was handed over for exactly £1 British, the cost of a cheap cup of coffee. It wasn't destroyed by a rival nation. It wasn't wiped out by a global depression. It was assassinated from the inside by a 25-year-old kid in a polo shirt, armed with nothing but a fax machine and a hidden computer folder. You look at your banking app today, in 2026. You see those digital digits glowing back at you, and you feel a profound sense of permanence. You probably think your money is safe, because the building it's in has marble columns out front, and a name that sounds like a Victorian duke. You believe that too big to fail is a physical law, just like gravity. But your balance is nothing more than a collective hallucination. It is a fragile agreement between you and a system, held together by gentlemen's handshakes and a terrifying amount of hubris. You are paying a stability tax every single day, a tax of blind trust in institutions, managed by people who are willfully blind to the fires burning in their own server rooms. History isn't a straight line of progress. It is a graveyard of fortresses that were supposedly impregnable, right up until someone left the vault door wide open. Let's examine the cornerstone of that graveyard, Barings Bank. In the early 1990s, Barings wasn't just a bank. It was the financial DNA of the British Empire. Founded in 1762, it was the oldest merchant bank in London. They didn't just trade. They shaped the world. When you walked into their offices, you were walking into a cathedral of capital. The partners at Barings lived by a code of effortless superiority. They believed their legacy was a titanium shield against the vulgarities of the market. But in 1992, they handed that shield to Nick Leeson, a working-class kid from Watford with no double-barreled surname. What he had was a ruthless hunger and a posting to the Singapore International Monetary Exchange. To the gray-haired men in London, Singapore was a digital Wild West, where they could print money in their sleep. They saw Leeson as a high-performing cog in a machine they didn't care to understand. But Leeson found a fatal crack in the cathedral wall. In high finance, the absolute golden rule is separation of powers. The person trading the money must never be the person settling the accounts. The dealer cannot audit the vault. But Barings, drowning in its own arrogance, allowed Leeson to do both. He was the head of the trading floor and the master of the back office. He was the player, the dealer, and the man emptying the drop box at midnight. To London, Leeson was a turbo arbitrageur. He was supposedly executing a flawless financial ballet, pocketing the tiny price differences across global markets. On paper, it looked like free money. In 1993, Leeson's supposed genius accounted for 10% of Barings' entire global profit. They showered him with bonuses. They called him a star. But they weren't looking at a star. They were looking at the glow of a fuse that had already been lit. We are about to open the autopsy report on the Barings collapse. We will trace how a single ledger entry, account 88888, became the black hole that swallowed a 2-century-old empire. And we will reveal why the security you feel today is just a ghost of that exact same system. To understand how a 233-year-old bank vanishes over a weekend, you have to look past the marble and understand the anatomy of a lie. In the air-conditioned glass towers of Singapore, Nick Leeson wasn't just trading. He was building a digital sarcophagus. It started in July 1992. A junior clerk under Leeson's watch made a simple human error, selling 20 contracts instead of buying them. The loss was roughly £20,000. For a titan like Barings, that is a rounding error. A drop of ink on a clean sheet of paper. But Leeson refused to report it. He would not let a careless clerk tarnish his golden boy image in the Far East. So he opened a ghost ledger. Account 88888. In Chinese culture, the number 8 signifies prosperity. For Barings, it would become a tomb. He buried the £20,000 loss in this error account, hiding it from the London auditors. He assumed he could trade his way out, wipe the slate clean, and lock the door. But the market is not a forgiving master. It doesn't care about your reputation. Leeson wasn't trading standard stocks. He was trading Nikkei 225 index futures. These were contracts that controlled massive baskets of Japanese companies. He wasn't just betting on a direction. He was betting on the volatility of an entire nation's economy. And when the trades went against him, he didn't hedge. He built a massive leverage bomb. By 1994, the hidden liability in account 88888 wasn't £20,000. It was $208 million. This is where the clinical reality of the fraud meets the criminal negligence of the bank. Every day, the exchange issued a margin call. They demanded hard cash collateral to cover Leeson's escalating, catastrophic bets. Leeson didn't have the cash. He didn't use sophisticated hacking to fool his superiors. He used scissors and tape. Leeson literally cut signatures off legitimate documents, pasted them onto fabricated margin requests, ran them through a fax machine, and sent them to London. He even invented a fictitious client named SLK to balance his books for a year-end audit. And London, blinded by the paper profits he was supposedly generating, they wired him hundreds of millions of dollars in real cash to fund his ghost account. They were funding their own execution. The executives looked at the faxed ledgers and saw a genius. In reality, they were bleeding to death. Then came the Black Swan. On January 17, 1995, at 5:46 a.m., a 6.9 magnitude earthquake struck Kobe, Japan. The city crumbled. The Nikkei index plummeted. Leeson, who had bet billions that the market would remain stable, stared into an absolute abyss. Most people would have folded. Leeson did the opposite. He went long. He bought thousands more futures contracts, desperately attempting to single-handedly prop up the entire Japanese stock market. He was trying to stop a tsunami with a bucket. By February 23, 1995, the math turned violent. The losses in account 88888 hit 827 million pounds. That is $1.3 billion. To put that number in perspective, that was more than the entire share capital and reserves of Barings Bank. The ledger finally screamed. On a single Friday, auditors uncovered the 888888 file. They didn't find a turbo arbitrageur. They found a smoking crater where a bank used to be. Leeson didn't wait for the handcuffs. He left a note on his desk reading, "I'm sorry," and caught a flight to Malaysia. The error account was no longer a secret. It was the murder weapon in the greatest financial suicide in British history. The end of an empire doesn't happen with a cinematic explosion. It happens in a quiet room, smelling of stale coffee, listening to calculators run out of digits. Over the weekend of February 25, 1995, the governors of the Bank of England scrambled to stop the systemic contagion. They called every financial titan from Tokyo to New York, begging for a buyer to take the Barings corpse. The answer was a universal no. Nobody wanted to touch a 2-century-old legacy, hollowed out by a single 28-year-old. On February 26, Barings was declared insolvent. Days later, the sixth great power of the world was sold to the Dutch bank ING for the symbolic price of £1. That is what 2 centuries of history, royal patronage, and global conquest were worth, once the lie was exposed. The price of a candy bar for the keys to the kingdom. Nick Leeson was eventually intercepted at an airport in Germany. He served 4 years in a Singaporean prison. But the true damage he inflicted wasn't confined to a balance sheet. He exposed the ultimate capital noir truth. The system does not have a steering wheel. We like to believe there are adults in the room. We tell ourselves that the complexity of modern finance, the algorithmic bots, The AI-driven hedges of 2026 is a sign of safety. We equate complexity with control. But the Barings collapse proves the exact opposite. Complexity is not a shield. It is a shroud. It is a mechanism to hide the fact that the people at the top have absolutely no idea how the money is being made, as long as the numbers keep going up. Barings was the blueprint for the modern financial blackout. When you watch a major Silicon Valley bank collapse in a weekend, or a crypto exchange evaporate overnight, you are watching the ghost of account 88888. The technology evolves, but the fatal flaw remains. We continually surrender our wealth to black box systems, where the people holding the keys are paid millions to keep their eyes closed. The error account wasn't a glitch in the matrix. It was the inevitable result of moral hazard. Barings died because an entire institution decided that asking hard questions was bad for the bonus pool. This leaves us with an uncomfortable question. A debate that financial historians still argue over today. Did the executives in London truly not know what Leeson was doing? Or did they see the red flags, understand the impossible math, and choose absolute willful blindness? Because his fake paper profits were paying for their summer estates? As you look at your screen tonight, ask yourself this. In a world of infinite, opaque complexity, do you really know who is holding the ledger? If one over-leveraged trader could destroy a 233-year-old bank with a fax machine, what do you think a rogue AI trading system could do today? Because in the ledger of history, every debt must eventually be paid.